This is the Fixer Punk Podcast, the podcast that, like Orange Cassidy, does not have a catchphrase. I'm Grayson Peltier. I know I haven't done an episode in a while. I'm just getting back to this. Have a little bit more time over the Thanksgiving weekend, although not really much, because we've had so much family stuff going on. But I thought, let me try to get an episode going in between all of these family parties, because I have a lot to say right now. There are probably going to be two episodes this week, actually. This one is going to be more economics and social movement focused, but the inspiration for this, a good part of the inspiration of this is professional wrestling. I was at AEW Full Gear last weekend. It was an amazing event, but I just didn't feel right. It felt wrong. It felt like something positive was being eroded in favor of something commercialized. It felt like the social and cultural movement of AEW was being eroded right before my eyes. And that's why I felt so sad with what went on with the Young Bucks, with Adam Page losing his match, although there is good reason why he lost that match, and I totally get it. That match was so amazing. But this isn't going to be the wrestling episode. I'm going to do a separate episode on what's going on in professional wrestling specifically. But I want to focus on a larger overall cultural and social trend that I believe is stemming from economics. So wrestling fans have been talking about hashtag AEW, specifically AEW fans have been talking about hashtag restore the feeling. The feeling of AEW, the culture, the movement of AEW has felt off. But I don't think it's just AEW. I feel like a lot of things have been feeling off. I feel like a lot of progressive social movements and content and things like that have been really slowing down and kind of grinding to a halt. And a lot of the social and political progress we've made is kind of eroding too and regressing toward the mean. My hypothesis here is that it is not a coincidence that this is happening as monetary policy has tightened up and we're seeing increased interest rates. And what that does is it causes a decrease in risk-taking, a decrease in investment. And that causes less new things to be tried, and it causes the capitalist overlords to throw fewer bones at things and to really regress things back to the way they were, or what they think is reasonable, or what they gaslight you into believing is reasonable and correct and good business, and only the stuff that makes good business sense. And of course, they are the ones who define good business sense, is what's going to be done. I talked about the economic police state, which is kind of where you start to have things where we're enforcing economic norms that benefit capitalists on each other. And that's part of why it infuriates me, going back to the wrestling thing, which I'm going to try to save most of the wrestling stuff for the wrestling episode. But when wrestling fans judge whether or not something is good based upon how high of ratings it gets, or how much money it's making the company, or how much merch sales, why should that matter to you? And that was kind of the AEW alternative culture thing, that it was going away from that kind of model, and people have not been feeling that anymore. But there's an off feeling in the world right now, especially with how people have interpreted the economy as well. And that feeling off, I believe, is attributable to the fact that new things, new positive developments are being slowed down, and there's a regression towards the mean. We see this in terms of labor movements. Thankfully, unionization is going strong, but quiet quitting and all of that stuff, all the worker power stuff is kind of going down a bit. You start to see the increase in victim blaming narratives, like the huge rise, the monumental rise of Caleb Hammer, the personal finance influencer. I think is emblematic of this, who basically shames people for not saving enough for retirement. So you're starting to see these austerity narratives going around. There's a book that I probably need to get my hands on. It's talking about how in recessions there are these gendered austerity narratives. I'll put the link to it in the show notes. Let me see if I have it here. Yeah, it's called Gendering the Recession, Media and Culture in the Age of Austerity. In an age of austerity. But media narratives are changing a bit, and the way that organizations and content creation are happening, I believe in general, is moving towards trying to get as big of a mass audience as possible and trying to make things as commercialized as quickly as possible. Now, I'm a big believer in creating alternative cultures and movements and things like that, but the money, the bones to be thrown, the corporate overlords kind of decide they're done throwing bones at alternative movements. And when you have a higher interest rate environment, you have less investment into things that are new, into new ideas. That's why tech companies were the first to get hit by all of this economic recession stuff, because tech companies run losses. They take on debt in order to basically innovate and create new things and differentiate themselves in the marketplace. You start to see a lot of market consolidation towards those who have existing incumbent wealth, and it creates that incumbency bias. And at the same time, what that results in is any sort of challenger brands sort of losing their identity because they want to try to mass commercialize as much as possible, getting a profit as quickly as possible. But in fact, that's really the wrong approach. Creating and maintaining an authentic social movement has benefits, but you don't see that in the short term. You see a lot of stuff just for short-term profit. You get too focused on that, and that's what we're seeing quite a bit. So when you have a situation where these new ideas are perceived as basically running a loss, as lost leaders, you have that move towards things that are going to have as much broad appeal. So you start to see a lot of selling out in the economy. In terms of political and social movements, you're seeing like the Cenk Uyghur and Young Turks. You're seeing that whole thing where they're going into the tough on crime type narratives. You have Cenk Uyghur running for president, which is ridiculous in and of itself and a complete waste of time. But you see this shift toward those things because those are considered to be more secure. And there's also sort of a shift in the consumer base, not just into a broader consumer base, and instead of going into smaller niche groups, because the money to invest into smaller niche groups kind of dries up. They're like, okay, it's not as good because things cost more. You have to make them appeal to as many people as possible. So like creating a niche group and appealing to that group is not going to be valuable, except if it's a niche group of high income earners with a lot of money in savings, because when you have a higher interest rate market, that is meant to incentivize people who have a lot of money, people who have existing wealth. So you always have to build things not for the working class who has some disposable income, because inflation's eating up the disposable income. You have to go towards the upper classes if you're going to make something that's a niche product. And that reflects in how content is created too, just like any other product. And they see like the stuff that's quote unquote more secure, the conventional capitalistic ideas, not the new ideas, not the killing the business type ideas, to borrow some words from the Young Bucks. So that is a lot of what we're seeing in the world today right now. So if you feel like something is off in the world, you feel like for some reason you just can't scratch the feeling that like the scene that you love, even the activism that you love, is kind of not really the same anymore. Like even in labor activism, because even though we're seeing good financial results, the DCCC is actually outraising the NRCC, the DCCC, Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and I believe the NRCC is National Republican Congressional Committee, if I'm getting those acronyms correctly. So Democrats are outraising Republicans right now. But Democrats have focused their identity around things that have extremely broad appeal, and that broad appeal appeals to people who are higher earners and who have a lot of money in the bank. Because unfortunately we have this situation where people who have six-figure earning jobs, who have a nice house, who have money in a 401k, for some reason feel like they are members of the rich upper class. They feel like they have more in common with multimillionaires and billionaires than they do with the lower working class, when in reality they aren't as close to billionaires as they think they are. And I think that's a reason why we have to get labor movement narratives into the minds of people who are higher earners and professional workers. I actually posted on this TikTok on the TikTok at FixerPunk about a scientists union in California that was on strike, and I think it's a very positive thing that people see themselves as part of the working class and that the labor movement can benefit them. But that's going to be a whole different episode. But you have working people with less disposable income to contribute. You remove investment and the idea that you can do that, then that changes things. Now, 2020 was pretty unique. 2020, we had a lot of investment after George Floyd into diversity, equity, and inclusion, into DEI. Now we're seeing the conservative pushback, the counter-revolution of conservatives against that. And conservatives are the conservative funders and organizations and all of that. Feels like a lot of progressive diversity-based causes are really driven by corporate America throwing a bone because they see that consumers have power. And at that time in 2020, because there's a lot of money being sent out in terms of stimulus, things like that, to keep the economy going and not as many goods to chase, consumers had a lot of power. So companies were like, okay, let's throw a bone to diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. Money's cheap. We can get more money in the door. Let's do this. And that's how you saw an increase in DEI investment and a lot of progressive social movements that got seeded in terms of capital because of the racial reckoning. And it worked. And it got a lot of really good ideas out there. And that started to spur further and further cultural change from the George Floyd protests. But now that stream of money is going down, consumers have less power, and institutional power, people with a lot of money in the bank in general, people who have existing assets, are the ones with power. That becomes less important to corporate America. This is why we can't be relying on macroeconomic cycles to ensure that marginalized populations and workers are being treated right. You have to set these things in stone into law so that they're prioritized. And so we never have a situation where we're randomly deciding to go ahead and prioritize people with tens of millions of dollars in the bank because they're getting 5 times the interest that they normally get on their savings accounts. And that human dignity is human dignity, regardless of what the economic situation is. But that was so different from any sort of recessionary type situation because the amount of money that was being put into the economy, and businesses had a different set of incentives, and they want to invest in being more inclusive. Even if it's just the optics of it, it put money and it put energy toward progressive ideas. But now we have consumers with less leverage, people in charge have more leverage, and I really want to examine how these things affect culture as well, because you're seeing, just as we're seeing this sort of shift in terms of economic thinking, it used to be sort of the economic thinking of let's focus on do good, going through the pandemic, we're all in this together, to every man for himself, protecting themselves and trying to hoard money for themselves with some of these finance-related narratives. And then you're also seeing sort of the erosion of alternative cultures, and a lot of alternative cultures ideas turning toward mass appeal. And you're seeing this weird moderation of things. And I think that they are really all connected. It is something that is connected to the economic state and the mindset of people. I was reading, when I was doing research for this episode, I actually read something saying that that in terms of media and entertainment, there was good spending even for like movie tickets back after the 2009 recession because people wanted to have an escape, but also there was a shift to cheaper intellectual property, remakes of things. And that's because those are things that they know will consistently make profit. Again, this type of environment creates risk aversion, economic risk aversion. So you have to do the safer thing. And even if the thing that you've been doing over the past 3 years is good, then you're still having some risk aversion. And also for cultural and social movements that have gone into the mainstream, like AEW did in wrestling, they're feeling the rush to, while they have money in the bank, make things more commercial and institutional and conform. And of course, there's always the general selling out cycle that any punk rock fan could talk to you about. But I see there's a little bit of pressure to kind of get into that mass commercialization mode more quickly, even if it means spending more money. But they're not willing to spend money necessarily on doing things an alternative way, even if it's less money. trying to do things an alternative way. They want to rush to commercialization because they're seeing, like, who knows, in the horizon, maybe we won't be able to do this in the future, but let's try it now. Let's try to commercialize things as quickly as possible and appeal to as big of an audience as possible right now. And especially audiences that we the capitalists perceive as being more valuable, larger, and doing more of the commercially and business appropriate thing in general. Culturally, and then of course in economic practices now, treating workers well is no longer considered to be in vogue in the business world. That's no longer the thing. Now the thing is how can we screw the worker over and make sure that they're as professional as possible. Now, these things could be totally unrelated. These things could be 100% totally unrelated. This is merely a hypothesis. Before you go at me in the comment sections and saying this is ridiculous, this is merely a hypothesis. Is that as we're seeing the world get more and more business appropriate and not taking that mindset that we adopted in the pandemic of doing things a new way, creating new things, and we're seeing the world try to return to a more professional, buttoned up kind of environment. That killing the business mindset as it's leaving the business world, is it a surprise that it's leaving the world of culture as well? Is it a surprise that a lot of our social, we're seeing a rise in social media of people that are shaming people about spending money right now and simping for capitalism, and we're seeing progressive content creators at the same time going through and going on the tough on crime boat? I don't think so. I think it's that people right now are looking for consistency and to shift back to the old way of things being done, of how things are done. And in capitalism, progress just tends to erode itself. I forgot, was it a punk rock artist that said nothing erodes faster than progress? But the mood, the feeling of progress, and this is also why I think people are like unhappy with the Joe Biden economy, is because for reasons unrelated to Joe Biden, there is less positive social progress going on right now because the money and the energy has gone away and has gone into, even if the numbers look good economically, they've gone into an austerity mindset. They've gone into an austerity mentality. Even that mentality of it is bringing a black cloud over things. So that is what I think is happening right now. If there's some other place in culture, business, community where you feel like social change is just kind of eroding kind of quietly and subtly, and again, these are very subtle signals, so I could be getting things wrong for sure. But where things are getting a little too commercial, getting away from positive changes that we saw through the pandemic and through some of the social progressivism, I want to hear about it. You can leave me a voicemail message at 844-477-PUNK, 844-477-7865. I want to hear about those. And then now I'm going to give you, actually, you know what? I'm going to save that for the next episode, for the wrestling-specific episode. If you want more of my work through the week, make sure you follow the TikTok at FixerPunk, FIXERPUNK. Instagram is also FixerPunk, FIXERPUNK. Twitter is at Grayson Nation, GRUYSON NATION. And I will be coming back with another episode discussing specifically restoring the feeling in AEW, what's happened with being the elite. And I do also have a wrestling-specific discussion Discord. Being the elite has inspired me a lot. The Young Bucks, Kenny Omega, their series Being the Elite has inspired me a lot to make a lot of positive changes in my life. And their attitude, just as you've seen those killing the business references peppered in, their attitude towards things has really inspired me in terms of my approach to social and cultural change. So I want to create a group discussion around those ideas, even as the Being the Elite YouTube series that really brought AEW into prominence has apparently come to an end. I'll talk more about my thoughts on that in the next episode, but I have a Discord now that is the Keeping It Elite Discord. That is available through the fixerpunk.com website, as is a bunch of other information. If you are involved in a progressive social movement and you want to keep a good feeling going in your progressive social movement or campaign, and you don't want to conform to the conventional median way of doing things and want to see success, continue to see success through taking that alternative path, which I believe is absolutely possible. The people who are doing all of this stuff to try to conform to the dominant culture when they're really leaders of an alternative culture, it is going to blow back on them in the face. It's not going to work. What does work is maintaining authenticity while using appropriate practices in combination with the alternative cultural native knowledge that you have built up through the culture and community you've built. And that's what my consulting practice, Off-Speed Solutions, seeks to help organizations to do: communicate that alternative, radical cultural vision of your socially responsible business, your movement, your nonprofit, your campaign, keeping those things prominent and keeping those ideas at the forefront while helping you to achieve success. You can go to offspeedsolutions.com for information on my consulting services there. And I hope that you will join me again for the next episode. Thank you for choosing to spend some of your time with me today. This content is for entertainment and general informational purposes only. We do not warrant or guarantee the accuracy of the information herein. It does not constitute medical, financial, legal, or business advice. The listener should not rely solely upon such and consult a competent professional before deciding to follow any course of action.